Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's Catalyze webinar. To kick us off today, I'd like to welcome and introduce our three panelists. First, we have Vanessa Barth. She is Associate Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, and Head of Lilly Gateway Labs East Coast. Lilly Gateway Labs provides expertise and capabilities to accelerate drug discovery and development through early stage engagement with biotech companies. Our next panelist, Mike Luther, is an entrepreneurial scientist and executive in the biopharmaceutical industry in several roles ranging from biotech startups to global pharmaceutical companies and CROs. Currently, he serves as STRM.BIO CEO and is a managing partner for bioinnovations. Finally, David Rothkopf is a strategic professional in the development and regulatory control of medical devices. He has started 3 medical device companies and is co-founder of MEDIcept, a company offering engineering, manufacturing, quality, and regulatory consulting assistance to medical device and IVD industries. I'd now like to pass the session over to our moderator, Gautam Prakash, who is the Associate Vice President of Intellectual Property, Policy, and Advocacy at Eli Lilly. Gautam also has a long history collaborating and working with Catalyze, so we're very, very lucky to have him and his continual involvement. So Gautam, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marissa, and thanks to RTI and for all of you for joining us, especially my panelists, including one of my colleagues, Vanessa. So I'm very happy that she's here, and Mike and David, of course. So the goal of this webinar is, if you're a small company, is to think about when you're trying to approach larger companies, how do you do that? And we'll go over some of the pros and cons and what you should think about. And so obviously the first goal that I think you should think about if you're looking is, what is your goal in approaching a larger company, right? So you just don't want to call up and say, I'm here, right? You want to think about what is it you're looking for. Are you looking to sell? Are you looking for a joint development, access to technology and resources, funding? I mean, these are all perfectly reasonable reasons to contact a larger company. And so, maybe David, let me start with you. You're an advisor for a lot of these companies. How would you suggest to a company when they come to you and say something like, I am interested in talking to a larger company for this or that reason? How do you get them ready for that?
So commonly, what I typically do is I talk to them and ask them if they've done enough research with the potential buying company that they want to speak to. What is their portfolio, and how does their product fit into their portfolio of different devices? I'm in, as Marissa said, I'm typically in the medical device side, IVD side. So a lot of companies have different products that are being sold to a particular physician, yet there's always a different way of doing something, another solution that a physician can actually utilize. And sometimes the companies, the larger firms, aren't necessarily doing those things. They're using the smaller companies as their sort of adjunct R&D departments and helping them sort of go along to come up with the ideas and talk to the doctors for their little niche, I'll say, ideas. And that's sort of one of the ways that I actually talk to a lot of our clients about is what do the large companies need, and how do you fill that hole for them?
Fantastic. Mike, you're a CEO, for example, of one of these companies. How can you provide a perspective from the CEO side as to how you are thinking about, making that contact? Are you the person who makes that contact? How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, for me now, currently in my current role, yes, I'm the person that's doing the outreach, and the way I look at it is whether I'm reaching out to an investor or I'm reaching out to a company, whether it's call it peer-to-peer or I'm going to a larger company. I mean, to David's point, you look for fit. Is there a fit? Where in terms of this is an area of active interest, this is an area that they have an active portfolio. And you might approach that saying, well, this may be an emerging area. So you might reach out to their venture arm. A lot of these, larger companies have a venture corporate arm. So you might reach out to them because you say that's going to be an emerging area. And this is an area they can invest and be part of and kind of see if this is something that's going to take out. But it is all about fit. And then, how you come into the organization, I think is also, you have to be very strategic there. It's great if you can go all the way to the C-level and you have that relationship and you have that contact, because then you can have that one-to-one, you're actually talking to the decision maker or makers. But at the end of the day, you still need a champion. And even if you got the decision maker, they're looking for somebody that's going to validate this. So I like to come at it two ways. I like to find a champion internally who can take it forward, who's going to actually be, and then try to work with get a high level conversation with the decision makers at the same time.
Great. Vanessa, I would suspect that our CEO, David Ricks, is probably not taking a lot of these calls, right? Because he's, the man in our company. And
let me put it's all about, and I can't stress this enough. Cold calls don't work.
Yeah.
Yes.
You want to build, you will either want an extremely warm introduction, or you want to figure out how you build that relationship through another different means.
Yeah, good point, Mike.
I do want to say I built upon that. Two of the companies that we sold, we actually met them at trade shows over multiple years. And then they finally, we sort of met sort of midway in the hallway and said, would you guys be interested? And then that's sort of how it turned into sort of meeting with VPs of marketing and VPs of strategic development.
I think you guys have that right. It's really about building relationships, and relationships take time. So this idea of doing your homework and understanding what a company's, I'll say, remit, vision, mission is, and thinking about, I'm obviously approaching you because I need something, and what am I going to give you in return? Because you really want it to be a symbiotic relationship. And so depending on where the company's at from a maturity stage of development perspective, you could be asking us to, hey, can we do an MTA so you can help validate my technology? I really need some feedback, and you might have some great insights on the best use case to help pull this forward. It could be, hey, I have a really mature platform. How about we apply this to a couple targets or a tissue together, all the way to, hey, I'd really love to think about, in licensing and acquisition. So I think about it from terms of what is the kind of life cycle of the company. There's a lot of different touch points along the way, and you can use those touch points to build relationships that then result in some of those kind of larger headline deals. But the idea is, how do you get to know each other, build the trust, and figure out how you can both win from the relationship.
So Vanessa, then you'd say a good package is one, and actually to all of you, where the reason for approach is clear, right? And of course, you could have multiple reasons, but at least you're not just like saying, oh, well, here I am, and please tell me. And I've seen a lot of this where people say something like, well, I don't know exactly what I want. It could be a whole bunch of different things, but they don't articulate any of them. And that, I think, would be a difficult pitch for you to accept. Would that be fair?
That is fair, and that's really frustrating for us. So we always look to the company to kind of tell us, what's the problem you're solving? What's the competitive landscape? Maybe why is your approach better? How is it differentiated? And because of that, it should be creating value. So if you come to us looking for the use case, that's tough. If you're looking to validate and you have an idea why that use case matches our organization, that makes it a lot easier. So it's hard when the conversation is, where does this fit? Help me find a problem to solve, versus let me show you the problem I'm solving and why this matters, in our case, to patients, and why this matters because you have expertise in your company that could help this succeed. Then it's a much more symbiotic relationship.
Great. And David, this might be a question because it came out of one that you just, a comment that you made. The question that came in was like, how do you develop these long-term relationships with the right people? Is it trade shows? Is it other venues? How does this work?
So there's lots of different venues. I mean, we do trade shows, and that's actually one of the device companies that I have right now that we're in the process right now of the FDA reviewing this product. We just came back from Montreal where at the OTA, traumatic surgery organization. And many of our KOLs were up there also. Many of our KOLs work with potential buyers of ours. So we have that type of conversation and that synergy and relationship. Other places are through investment groups and through innovation organizations. We've met several other companies through that methodology, and there's lots of ways of meeting people through that avenue. A lot of companies actually do send their investment groups to those incubators, to those groups like Mass Challenge and the such. And that's how we actually come together and become friends. A lot of times I've now become friends with several of these companies. And although in some cases we might not sell to them, they're still open to conversations and open to ideas of what I know and or other people that I know that are starting companies want to connect with.
Great. All right, so let's move on to the next question, which is, okay, so the initial contacts were made, there's interest on both sides, that we're going to continue, and we've sort of exchanged phone numbers, as it were. Vanessa, let's start with you. What happens next? Is it Lilly just goes off and writes a check, right? That's about it. We can stop the webinar right now, and
I wish.
It's all good, right? So
don't we all wish? Like, everyone wants to be efficient. Markets are tight, right? But so then it's the dance. It's the dance of the data, and that's really where I think you get to know each other and see if you're a good fit. So we talked about fit. One is, expertise. The other can also come down to company culture, which is really important to have a productive relationship. But generally speaking, if we've kind of had our first, I'll say, non-confidential conversation, you'll generally move to a CDA with us, where we're hoping you're going to share a lot more data. I will say at Lilly, we geek out on the data. That really is the driver of that conversation. As the relationship matures, what we expect to do is show up ready to ask you lots of questions. The questions are for our learning. The questions are to make sure we understand where you're headed, and it helps us shape like the scope of work we hope to do together. So you will probably go through a series of conversations and exchanges really focused on the data, where we're really trying to align what are our interests and how do those interests translate into the scope of work, the scope of a deal, i.e. the targets we might include, or the tissue. And so as that scope of work comes together, depending on the magnitude of the conversation, it might be, hey, it could be as simple as a research agreement where there is some money exchanged up front, and on the back end of data delivery, there's generally probably a formation of some sort of committee to talk science and next steps throughout the project. And if it's something on the larger deal front, the idea is that you might get some sort of NBO or term sheet that would let us into a formal data room. So we're really big on how do you gently escalate the process of what you're sharing. We ask a lot of questions. We are a firm believer that feedback is a gift. And so if the relationship comes to fruition, that's great. If not, we will give you a lot of feedback. And that's one thing to remember. It doesn't always happen the first time round. There's a lot going on the walls inside the company around strategy, around budgets, all sorts of things that deal team really does not have control over. So they say timing's everything. Be patient. Always ask for the feedback. That will give you insights into why things didn't move forward and whether it makes sense to come back. So patience is a virtue in this case, and stay the course.
Great. David, I'll go to you next, and then Mike, I have a question for you at the end, which is if you want to share some stories about, how companies, what some of the crazy things they may have asked for, or vice versa. But David, before that, how do you advise companies on getting themselves ready for the kinds of things that Vanessa, that people like Vanessa are going to ask for, right? So, you go back and you say, I need all these things. People are like, oh my God, I never even thought about collecting those. Like, how do you get ready for that?
So I'll tell you, again, because I'm in the device side and the IVD side, it might be a little bit different than the tissue side or the pharmaceutical side, or even some other types of biotech. But for example, in one of our cases, one of the companies that we sold, it was the design history file. They wanted to see, where did we come up with the idea? Who did we talk to? What type of KOLs did we talk to? Other physicians. What validations did we do when the FDA reviewed and agreed to the product, and had a market authorization for the product? Did they have any questions when we started selling the product? Which hospitals are we selling to? And in some respects, what contractual agreements do we have with those hospitals? Because the hospital contracts were different. And then how did we get through the VAC systems, the value-added committees? What information do we get from them? What type of reimbursement information do we have? So we all packaged all that stuff up and it was in the second company, because I learned from the first company what they were going to be looking for. So we packaged all that stuff up such that when we did go on somewhat of a road show, for lack of a better word, we had that data already. And then based upon the NDAs, based upon the data room, based upon the questions that were asked and the questions we asked them, that's when the information was sent back and forth.
Great. So sorry, Vanessa, go ahead.
Can I quickly layer on, David? I think you outlined that really nice. So there's like the data you generate yourselves as a company, and then there's this idea of what's your network that extends beyond your walls. Who else are you using to generate data? What regulatory interactions have you had? All of those types of documents, getting them organized, whether you're very early stage or later stage, starting that process about understanding where are the relationships, how are you documenting your data, what are the statistics you're using, how are your instruments validated, what's your quality system. As you become more and more mature as a company and your products or your assets are advancing, you can imagine that there's an explosion of touch points outside your company, and those touch points are very important to your partnerships.
Great. So Mike, any kind of oddball stories you'd like to share on how you maybe questions that companies will ask for? We thought, well, I'm surprised they even asked one for that piece of information. Or conversely, as your CEO of the company, this stuff is necessary. Are you trying to collect it early, for example?
Yeah, I think, Vanessa, she kind of touched on it. Having a well-organized data room, you can't start earlier enough. And I think as you, and let's face it, in this day and age, you're constantly working with third parties. And, whether or not that data is completely sitting in your data room, or there's summaries with touch points and go-to people and everything. I guess I've said on both sides, because I've been the big pharma person going out there looking for deals or looking for investments, and doing collaborations and R&D, and then in 4 different companies I've been the CEO and trying to get this. So I guess it's interesting. The oddball, I guess there's nothing odd. You gotta be open for everything. You sometimes, I guess you learn from this, but and maybe this reflects, first time entrepreneurs who are putting companies together, that they haven't really thought this out. And, because I've even had, people have asked for raw data. Can I see your data files? Can I see your data files? Not the summarized data, but I can actually go back, and we want to analyze the data in our own way. We want to look at this. I've even had them ask for cell images. Can we see imaging? Can we see your image? So I think you have to be, prepared. I guess it's the old, like Boy Scout, be prepared. You never know what you're going to get asked. It's not necessarily. I kind of look at it, and I guess this is the, sort of it's as you're pitching, as you're going out there, and this is because you have different audiences, and different audiences are looking for different things. Because you have people on the business side, you have people on the finance side, you have people on the science side. So they're all looking at it through their own viewfinder. Someone said to me many years ago, is Mike, when you're given, this, and this was actually internal to a big pharma, but it really plays out into small companies, into large companies, or small companies to invest. You're the, call it as the person out there making the press, you're the owner of an art gallery. You can't show them the entire art gallery. You want to show them enough that teases them. And I think it's very important that people understand, and this has already been discussed as around the table, is how do you engage them that they see what your differentiator is, what's the opportunity, and why, why should they spend? And they need to see that in 5 minutes. If you can't, it's almost like an elevator speech. If you got the CEO of a large company or the managing partner of a large, and you're in that elevator in 2 minutes, what are you going to tell that person that they want to come back and learn more? Don't try to tell them everything, because it is a process. And that's what we just said, you've got to do that. And that's, it's I call it the know, like, trust piece. You get to know somebody, you got to like them, trust them, and feel like, hey, there is something there. And then then the onion process starts peeling the onion back. I want to know more and more and more. And then eventually you're going to be under an NDA. And then after the NDA, then I want to start looking at maybe your technical data, your scientific data. And then I want to look at your corporate structure, your financial data, et cetera, et cetera. And then we start really saying, hey, do we really want to have a long-term relationship? It is a lot like dating. It's a dating process and deciding what do you want the short-term and the long-term relationship to look like.
Yeah, great. So changing gears slightly, and the question has come in, and it was really going to what I was going to ask. Vanessa, let's start with you. So at what stage does Lilly look at companies? So Lilly's a little odd, I think, in a very good way, which is that we have this incubator program, perhaps unlike other pharmas. Maybe I don't know if that's true, but one of the questions that came in was a question for Vanessa: do you interact with academic labs, for example, working with patient data? How do you de-identify data, safety and efficacy? So maybe you can just start with thinking about, like, what if I'm at what stage does Lilly start getting interested?
So I will say, I think all of pharma, not just Lilly, is moving earlier and earlier. So I look at it and I think the company sees it as getting involved early, coming alongside, yes, academics, coming alongside early startup companies, and doing science together is really important. One, both parties learn. Two, it helps with just, I'll say, strategic decision-making on where we might want to head in the future and who we want to partner with. And three, you have to love on that science early, because in order to get to those larger deals, the ones making the headlines, you have to invest the time and the energy. So I would say that Lilly really starts to come alongside even seed stage companies as early as 1 to 2 to 3 people. Generally in that space, they're approaching us because they're looking for us to do some sort of MTA, some sort of collaboration that would be funded by ourselves, where we do science together, right? They don't have the bandwidth and the investment yet for some of the things they may want to accomplish. And so they see us as a partner that can bring a few cards to the table, and they want us to see them and the cards they're bringing to the table. So we get involved very early. When we talk about investing, we generally invest in seed and Series A rounds. We look to come to the table. We never lead around. Our goal really is to fuel that science, accelerate it towards proof of concept, and make sure that we don't deter others from coming alongside. And so that's where I think you'll see this with Lilly. You see this with other pharmas such as Pfizer and their Ignite program, Lilly and our Catalyze 360. It's really, how do you come alongside the science, be in a spot to help influence and shape, but do not take control. And so I think that's just a much different ethos and partnering concept that's really come to fruition in the last 3 to 5 years.
Great. A related question, and I'll stay with you, Vanessa, is how do large companies go about looking for what they need? In other words, so the question was not sort of the general strategic thing, but more of when they recognize a need, like, how do they go about, do we go about looking for it? I say you, us, we. Do we go about looking for it, or do we wait for people to approach us? Do they look at domestically, internationally? How does that work from a pull rather than push?
Yes, to all of that. So I will say our business development space or organization really has 2 components. I'll say our traditional corporate business development focuses on our current therapeutic area footprint and thinking about the needs in those spaces. When we talk about Catalyze 360, which is composed of venture sciences and investing, Gateway Labs, and Explore R&D, that's where we're looking to fuel companies through money, space, and relationships and capabilities. So in this earlier stage bucket, we also have the flexibility to think about where the company should be headed next. That could be new indications, new therapeutic areas, and new technologies. So we really try and come at it from the perspective of what's on strategy now and what should be on strategy in the future. I'll say we have our business development arm, and then we have our established therapeutic areas and functional areas, and they have search and evaluate colleagues also looking. And then we all come together understanding what are the immediate business needs, and then what could future opportunities look like.
Great. David, do you, when you advise companies, when you seek in contact, are you concerned about it being too early or too late? Or as Vanessa said, like a lot of these bigger, certainly pharma is looking early. So does the stage matter? Is there such a thing as too early and too late?
No, not really. I mean, in many respects, on the device side, they're coming in after you've received your FDA market authorization commonly. There are several companies that are on the bleeding edge, I guess I'll say, of certain things that are important in the industry. So, for example, certain robotics companies, certain oncology companies, where companies will come in when they are working on, say, their clinical trials, will fund or will take a little piece of the company just to be part of them, just to understand what's really going on and get a good handle, give them some advice, some education, some additional knowledge. But then they'll usually take a step back and let the company actually do what they need to do and know what they do what they know they need to do. And then as it's moved along, when it gets through clinical, when it gets through the FDA, usually that's when the question of, do we now acquire that company? Do we now take a step back? One of our clients actually, it was a robotics company, actually had 2 or 3 larger firms invest about $10 million into them. Not a very large amount, but enough in there to get a piece and understanding of what was going on. It was interesting because they were competitive companies. And eventually the company did sell to a third entity. And when I did talk to a friend of mine who actually was with one of the companies, I said, well, what did you do? I mean, he goes, look, I went from $10 million and we made $40 million. So although we didn't end up with the product, we actually were, from an investment point of view, it worked out well for us.
Mike, when you join a company as a CEO, when does the company need a CEO? And what do you look for to say, this is something that has legs and I think is actually going to move forward? What is your thought process in those sorts of things?
When a company needs a CEO, I mean, I guess determines the type of company. Also, what stage are you actually starting to create the company? You can do it. A lot of companies, a lot of small entities do fractional CEO because the CEO is wearing. Really the CEO is the CEO, the chief business officer, the head of HR, the head of finance. He or she are wearing multiple hats in those very early days and pulling together what you need externally to make that happen. So you have to be an organizer and pull this together. And it gets to a point where you realize, that this fractional role really needs more than just somebody part-time. And then maybe you start having a CEO with a fractional chief business officer or a fractional CFO type person. And then as you build out. In terms of looking at it, when I'm looking at a new opportunity, the first and foremost, and I guess because I'm a scientist by training, I really start looking at the fundamental science of the company. And is there there? Is there, and sometimes companies have a great idea, or a startup, an academic spin out has a great idea, but it's not really focused, and you can't. So can I see the science, understand the science, and see a there, even though if they're not even there, and say, okay, well, how do we organize this? How do we focus it? What problem are we really trying to solve? And what is our path forward? And if you can develop that, then you say, okay, I can see this. This is really exciting and new. I mean, the current company I'm in right now is we all understand that gene delivery is an issue. So how do we get beyond AAV and LNPs if you think about gene therapy in terms of next generation of delivery? And obviously people are trying to do this. This is really a very different approach. But if it works, it solves a lot of problems. And and the fundamental science shows that it does work. And I think that's what got me excited and why I do that. I have to see that. And it may be, sometimes you're with whether, whatever the modality is, do you see the path forward? And, is there a path forward? And what are the key hurdles you have to overcome? And do you think with the right resources, the right people, because it takes a village to make these things happen. Can you pull and put these pieces in place to make that happen? And if you can't say yes to those things, then you got to ask yourself why you're dipping your toes. Because it's not dipping your toes normally, because you're jumping into the deep.
Yep, fair enough. David or Vanessa, you want anything to add to that topic?
I think how Mark articulated this idea kind of sent me for an image of like this snowball that keeps rolling, and just thinking that the core is really the science, the fundamental science, and a focused problem you're solving. That's one thing we'll see sometimes with some of small startups is they're trying to tackle too much at once. They've got too many applications for their platform, or maybe in the space of a therapeutic, they're trying to modify a unique cargo as well as its delivery. So making sure that you don't like bite off too much, and this idea of really staying focused. If you look too broad, that can be a turnoff from a strategic's perspective on thinking, oh, there's too much going on here. Let's let this sort itself out.
Something that Mike said actually resonates on my side too, is that a lot of companies have great ideas, they got great concepts, but they don't actually have a solution. And that's something that, you buy a solution, you fund an idea, but you buy a solution, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So going back a little bit to our first topic, when you are thinking about setting up a company, or you're joining a company, in case of Mike, and I'll start with you, David, on this. Is there any difference in the way you do fundraising? And so let's say I know that my solution would be, back to solutions now, solution would be acquirable more likely by a strategic versus, I'm raising VC and maybe going for an IPO. Would you fundraise differently? And I'm asking because I can just imagine, and we'll get to Vanessa when we talk about Vanessa, I can just imagine Lilly is not interested in acquiring a company where the cap table's got some crazy uncle and auntie there who's got like 2 shares that you have to deal with, right? So is that something that you think about early, or money is money, and good small money and stupid money are the same?
No, I mean, you go, Mike. You go, Mike, first.
No, money is not money.
That's correct. Yeah, money is not money. I mean, and really, how you want to go over and structure the company does play a role. One of our companies we structured actually in a debt method, selling convertible notes to start off with, and then with milestones, and then selling, and then converting those milestones over. But you're correct. You don't really want to have a company with 100 stockholders, because it's just becomes unruly and uncontrollable. So even in most of my companies, you do some bootstrapping up front. You run your first round of seed money, and then you go to either a third party, whether it's a PE group and or angels. In our case, both times it was angels, and then we went over and moved on to a purchasing company. And actually, the angels were really useful in that respect too, because not only did they sort of give us a first round of due diligence, so we knew what we were, especially in my first company, we knew what we were going to be looking for. or the purchasing company we were going to be looking for, it sort of helped us with our professionalism. As a bunch of engineers in the company, I had the MBA, but everybody else didn't. So it really gave us some credibility with the purchasing company, which was a multi-billion-dollar company out on the West Coast while we were on the East Coast. So it was just that's how we sort of did it, sort of friends and family, a little bit of structure, a little seed, and then went to angels.
Great. Mike, you want to go next? I know I threw that in there only because I knew that was, dumb money and small money are two different, very different things.
Well, I mean, when you're first starting out, I mean, seed monies, you may be looking for family offices, high net worth individuals, even angel networks. And some of those can be strategic, some of those can be non-strategic. It's money. It's just to help you get the idea. And of course, I also believe, think about non-dilutive funding too. I mean, think about your SBIRs, think about other types of grants that you can get. I mean, now with ARPA, I mean, we'll see where ARPA goes in the next few years, but it's a great opportunity too. But then you decide, as you're evolving, you got that initial monies, and then you're going out, and your product, you now have sort of a product focus, whether that's platform development or platform with a pipeline, and how you're thinking about that is in what are the type of monies. And you might go to venture firms which could be a follow-on seed type investment, and you might be a venture capital through a corporate, say, go to Lilly's venture arm versus go to the Lilly, call it more BD type activities. But I'm just picking on Lilly as an example. Most pharma have this, or you're going to a more traditional VC strategic, but you want to bring strategics in with, once you have that, because you need them to help to make, we go back to the beginning of this, these VCs, these investors, as they come in, they're going to help broaden your network, make the right introductions, help you guide the strategic. And then obviously, and sometimes it's not just other investors, but they have the relationship, maybe back to they may have the relationship with the CEO from Lilly. So that's where you get that relationship. But you have to be careful. Then, as you're getting through this, there's a catch-22 I think most companies face. As you start to really raise serious money, you want to develop, because and I can't say this for every type of company, but most of the companies I've been involved in, we're not going to be a fully integrated pharmaceutical company. We're not going to take this all the way to market. And do you want to take it to IPO, or do you want even if you take it to IPO, you want a partner? And who is your partner going to be? So you go through this almost duality of path. Having a partner helps you raise money, but you need the money to actually get your science to the point where a partner wants to come along. And it's two different, I mean, it's probably the same approach in certain ways, but you're going after two different audiences when you have that. And even if you're trying to say, I want to just partner license this asset or this entity, you're still looking for investors and partners to come along. So it's not I've never looked at it as either or. I always look at it as an and. I'm constantly looking for a partner to come in. How early you want that partner, it's up based upon your strategy and your business plan, and how far do you think you can take it on your own before you bring a partner in. But think about clinical therapeutics, and I'm happy to hear Vanessa say this, because I think over the last, since 22, there's been this bring me a clinical ready asset to come forward. And that, the days of platforms of 20 and 21 and during the COVID run have kind of gone out. I'd like to see, the pendulum swing back a little bit earlier, because when can you really start engaging? And I think that, one of the questions I saw is, if you go early, you said, we're looking for something later stage, you keep coming back. No does not mean no. And Vanessa can say that, maybe you get tired of hearing from the same, hey, we talked 6 months ago, but I wanted to give you an update of where we are. Because if you've got real progress and things change, as we know, investor strategies change, pharma strategies change, both the areas, modalities, et cetera, they're looking for. So you can't just take no as a no. You got to be consistent. You got to leave your ego to the side, and it's like you got to,
So Vanessa, let's
have a Teflon skin.
Okay, no, so I think you're right.
Let's pick
And
up on
I don't get frustrated when people keep coming back, especially if they're coming back with excellent questions and more data, right? So if you receive feedback and it's a gift, think about the feedback. Some of it you may need to let roll off. Some of it is probably actionable and interesting. And so what's the next round of data? How do you keep the conversation going? I also saw a question in the chat, since we're kind of on the topic of financials or finances. Pharma do a lot of research collaborations that have nothing to do with taking a position in the company. So this idea of, hey, what's the research or work plan look like? What do we think it's actually going to cost for kind of funding, materials, headcount, et cetera? And then, okay, let's do that together, right? So who's doing what components of the science? How do they come together? And then what's the check you write to make sure that the partner is fully funded to do the collaboration with you? Strategics do that a lot. They do it usually in an earlier space where they're really trying to wrap their head around something new. I also saw something around IP. That's one thing to navigate carefully if you are a platform company, as you do broader deals, is understanding who's bringing what IP to the table, and then what are you going to do when new IP could be generated from the relationship. At least in our incubator spaces with Gateway Labs, companies coming in, we can invest, we don't have to. We have nothing to do with the company's IP unless we do some sort of formal deal. So our goal is really letting CEOs choose their own adventure and get close to us when they're comfortable and ready. So that really comes back to the CEO of the company. What's your strategy? How can you bring in some non-dilutive funding? And I think research collaborations and pharma partnerships can do a great job bringing in some of that non-dilutive funding. So I think that's one nice path forward. And I do think it's that chicken and the egg on the funding and the science and the data and that flywheel. And how do you get that flywheel spinning? So I loved your statement, Mike, about it being an and. So as a company, your, I'll say, exit strategy will probably continue to evolve with different variables and factors. You have a picture of where you're headed. You kind of need the roadmap, but the idea is you generally take a few detours on your way to sometimes get to the same or very different destinations. So that's why it's so important to be flexible and pursue both, I'll say, partners and collaborations as well as straight funding, because in this market right now, it's much harder to close your rounds. And so there's different ways to get that financial support into the company.
Great. Vanessa, you talked about Gateway Labs, and there's a question about that, which is, how do you separate Lilly's internal research from Gateway Labs to avoid a conflict of interest?
Sure. So we have a variety of sites. Sometimes our sites are completely standalone. So physically they are separate. I will say in Boston, we co-locate alongside Lilly's research, but my Gateway floors are card access only. Only a handful of individuals have access into those spaces. And even everything from tracking visitors to the site, we have our own system for retrieving the companies to retrieve their guests. So we put a lot of process in place for separation to protect IP. We also really promote, I'll say, an information hygiene culture. So we always talk about safety culture in the lab. In any incubator setting, be it pharma or not, nonprofit, you really have to train your teams to be conscientious about information hygiene. That's also very important. At the same time, it's the double-edged sword of, you also want to have all these amazing conversations. So if you're co-located and that proximity is there and you've got this complementary science going on, you want to have the conversation. So you have to be very intentional about how you move through the space, aware of who's around you, and making sure that those conversations are covered by CDA. Always assume they're not. And don't assume that somebody standing next to your acquaintance is working for the same company. So I'm from Indianapolis. The Boston ecosystem just is so amazing and bustling right now. But, you know, when I'm in the coffee shop, I have tons of probably industry, academic, biotech colleagues all in there grabbing a coffee or a tea. And so what I can do and say, I just have to be extremely mindful. And so that's the same also in Gateway Labs and any other incubator setting or accelerator setting that you're going to come across.
Yeah, great. Actually, I'll stay with you, Vanessa. There's another question about strategics, and you know, Mike and David, please, once I ask the question, you can feel free to weigh in. You know, do strategics look to get equity out of the small company, or are they just trying to do science together? You know, does Lilly put in non-dilutive funding? Which, you know, I used to work for the government. That makes perfect sense to me as the government, because, you know, in that business of diluting anybody's funding, but perhaps not true for Lilly. Do you want to take that?
Sure. So I think this comes back to aligning interests. So understanding what Lilly's trying to gain from the relationship and understanding what the company or the biotech is trying to gain. We do a lot of collaborations that have nothing to do with taking a position in the company. That comes back to fully funded kind of research, I'll say collaborations. In Gateway, for instance, we have companies that we learn that they are growing because of the fact that we may already be making an investment in them. We have companies who want to come to our space, but don't want us at the table yet. They're too early. So part of the process of coming into the space is actually the fact that it's non-confidential. So we really try and make it a no strings attached model. The idea is that you want to be part of the community and you're going to engage in the manner that makes sense for your company at the time it makes sense for your company. We do a lot of deals too, where some of that financial exchange on bringing the companies together does come through in the form of equity. But that is something where we really try and start with what are our aligned interests. What's the scope of work or the transaction that's going to take place? How do we construct a deal that incentivizes behaviors from both organizations to head in the same direction, which has a lot to do with contract language, and then figuring out how do we make sure that we feel there's an equitable win-win in what value is being brought to the table.
Great. Mike, do you want to address any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been on both sides of this. I mean, yeah, Vanessa talked about MTAs early on, where you may just be exchange of research materials just to test and try things out with no financial obligations. You may get they may do something for you, and you get the data. You get the data in exchange, and it could help or hinder you. But maybe it's insightful. It's data you have, and it'll help you think about next steps. And let's face it, even company at least in my prior large pharma days, and we gave grants. We made grants to both individuals as well as had large programmatic grants with various academic institutions. And sometimes, you know, it's monies with milestones and royalties tied to it with no equity, and sometimes it's equity only, and sometimes it's a combination of equity with milestones. And I've seen them, I guess, done all different ways around that. I think it's all about the opportunity and the belief. There's also optionality agreements where it may be a small amount of money with no obligation beyond that. If you do produce X, Y, then there's an optionality that they get preferred rights to X, Y, which could be everything from equity to just milestones and royalties down the way. And I think as a young and emerging company, you want to look at that. And I think you constantly need to be looking, let's face it, non-dilutive funding is a gift. Take it, because, you know, it's, again, I think somebody said, you know, if you're going to like acquire, and there's 100 different shareholders and it's all different, and it's a very complicated cap table. If you've got a very simple cap table with a lot of non-dilutive funding that help you got to that, call it proof of principle or proof of platform, that really goes a long way in helping you move, because it's a lot simpler to put a deal together.
Yeah. So what we're hearing then is that from at least from Vanessa and Mike, and David, please pick up on this, is that there is no one size fits all. I mean, there are so many different ways of making the deal.
It's not a plug.
Depending on who's making the deal, who's acquiring the company, all of this stuff. So, David, now you're getting to a point where you come to these companies and maybe one comes to you and says, I don't even know which one makes sense. Like, how do you go through those options and think through like how you want to do this? Give advice to companies.
If you're talking about if there's multiple potential buyers,
buyers or different ways of doing the deal, right? So obviously, so Mike's basic point of if there's non-dilutive funding, take it. That's that's
yes.
Pretty straightforward. But whether you want to do material transfer agreements or whether you want to do science together, like obviously each comes with the pluses and minuses. And how do you think that? How can you help companies think that through?
So the device side of the world is a little bit different than the pharma side of the world because of time. And I guess the device side of the world is actually a much quicker. I don't want to say that necessarily true, but there are a lot of companies that will create medical device products, and you'll go through the whole process within 3 years, from creation through FDA clearance, within 3 years. So there's a time difference, and there's a fundraising and fund amount difference in that vein, from a pharmaceutical side. So it is a little bit different in that vein. But Mike is 100% correct. Non-diluted funds is really the best. And like I said, we've done debt equity, debt conversion actually, as a way of raising funds also. When you're moving closer and closer and closer to a potential purchase, or to a potential VC or PE type of funding, usually you have to go over and look at the relationship. Honestly, that's really what we've talked about to many of our clients is what does this person bring to you? Forget the money part of it, but what do they actually bring to you? How do they help you? I can't remember if it was Mike or Vanessa made the comment about, sometimes those investors actually might know the CEO of a potential acquiring company. So those introductions actually help out very, very well. And that's usually the way we sort of work, is to say, what pros and cons, how are you actually, what are the strings that are attached to this money that you're going to be receiving?
Yep. Excellent. So I'm just reading some of these questions here. Let's see. Actually, before we go to them, let me just give each of you a minute. Is there anything that we overall that you would like people to know? Anything we haven't addressed that you think, this is something that you should be thinking about? Let me start with you, Vanessa. Is there something that we haven't really talked about right now that you think, look, if I'm going to give you one piece of advice, it will be this?
Oh, wow. There's probably two themes for me coming out. One, it's used in other parts of life. It takes a village. So this idea of, as you're building up a company, really building the relationships, seeking diverse inputs and feedback, and thinking about how that either reinforces your current path or might change it, is so important. The second piece is probably, if this is your first time going through it, network is everything. And this builds on what David and Mike both said. You need to surround yourself with some other peers who are also CEOs. I have not been a CEO, but having multiple of them in my building, they are lonely. They are looking for peer groups. They're looking for how to navigate different circumstances. It's you need a support group of individuals who are going through it with you for the first time, and those who are seasoned, who have been through it, because there's a lot of things that you can navigate and learn, so that you don't make those either same mistakes, or you feel more comfortable in the decisions you're making. So I think that's very important as well. And to stay focused. I come back to, when things get rough, we tend to take the path of least resistance. We'll see companies or ideas start to expand when things get rough. So rather than navigating the data in hand and thinking about how you move through that data to the next step, we see companies pivot. And this idea of pivoting, there's a time and a place for it. But if you do it too soon, it can be very bad. And if you're doing it kind of with the help and support of, I'll say, your board and your team and your mentors, it could be making a lot of sense. So it takes a village. Find a peer group, stay focused. And I guess those are some key themes for me that I've seen with the companies I've been interacting with, especially with markets so tough.
Fantastic. Mike?
No, it's been well said. I mean, I think make sure you have a story. I mean, I think that's, we haven't talked about that, but it's, it's product development, but what's your story? What's your pitch? How are you selling yourself? Because this is a sales job. I mean, you can't sell just sometimes companies are formed around ideas if you got the right team. So it's getting the right team in place. Sometimes they call it jockeys on a horse, so to speak. So it's the jockeys on the horse and the right side. And then can you tell that story? Is it a compelling story that somebody says, I want to be at the table. I'm willing to put, dollars or equity to have a stake in this company. And I think
Great.
It's important that in that team that you have the right players in that, and that you bring experience. And I mean, Vanessa, the CEO is the loneliest job in the world. It is, and you need a peer group, and there are peer group out there for CEOs, and you should take advantage of that. You take advantage of your board. When you say building a team, as you put a board together, sometimes that board comes, with the money comes the board, but other times you get to put that together yourself. Build a strong board. Get a board that will tell you the truth, that will be honest. Feedback is a gift. I think it's a great message to come back from this, whether you're getting that from an investor, a pharma entity, but also your own board.
Yep. David, 1 minute for you, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I mean, it's sort of tied into what Vanessa and Mike went over and said is listen. Listening is a really key tool that you need to hone when you're a CEO. You're in charge of a company. The other component is that you're in charge of a company. The product that you are creating is not your child. It might feel like your child, but it's not sometimes. It's not. And when you pivot too much, when you try to helicopter parent, I guess I'll say, you cause more problems than solutions. And I've seen that actually happen much more often than not when someone believes that's like, this is the only way I can do this. No. If you listen well, if you understand, if you talk to other people, you will find a solution to a problem.
Fantastic.
That's quick.
Yep.
Quick and dirty.
Yep, that's great. A couple of things. If these webinars have been useful, please tell Catalyze no. We're here to help you to succeed. And then there's a feedback survey, so please fill that out. And all that remains for me to do is to thank my panelists for their time. Thank you, Vanessa, Mike, and David. You've been fantastic. We didn't get to all of your questions, so we will try to get them addressed. Marissa, I'll turn it over to you if you have any last words.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a fantastic discussion. For everyone still on the line, our feedback poll is still open for just a few more seconds. And you can always connect with us on our website, nhlbicatalyze.org. And then we have several email addresses on that website as well that you can utilize for any questions. And if there's any questions that we haven't addressed today, I will go ahead and try to collate those and then send out responses individually. So thank you all for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.